So we'll be starting with our sleeves. So you can see here I've got the lining on the top and the main fabric underneath. Just make sure your notches are matched up so you've got the right sides together. So just start by using a 1.5 centimeter seam allowance all along the hem. And what we're going to then be doing is pushing the seam allowance onto the lining panel and sewing about 2 to 3 mil from the edge. Essentially, we're creating a casing for your elastic to go in. Once you've done that, you can grab out your elastic. I've got a little 0.6 millimeter one here, and just wrap it around your wrist as so, and pull it up to where it's going to be sitting on your bicep. So depending on the elastic you've got, the stretch retention is going to be different, but just make sure it sits nice and comfortably on your arm and isn't too tight. It doesn't actually need to even be that tight, but just make sure it sits snug around your bicep. And then cut 2 lengths of this. Now, using your loop turner, we're going to be pushing that through the channel you've made on your sleeve hem. Slowly pushing it all the way through until it comes right out the other end. So you can see the little hook here. Just latching your elastic end onto the hook and latching it and making sure that we're securing the other end of the elastic just so it doesn't get pulled through the channel. Now you can just very, very slowly pull your fabric along the elastic until the other end comes out the side. Unlatch it, and what we're going to do is just backstitch that a couple of times to make sure it's secure. And then take out the pin on the other side, make sure it's with inside your channel, and just backstitch there as well. To even out your gathering, all you need to do is just pull and it should do it pretty evenly. Now we'll be sewing up the inner sleeve seam. So what you want to do is just match where your elastic is and start sewing all along the inner sleeve seam, just back tacking across the elastic to make it extra secure. And now we're going to be folding the outside, the main fabric, up over the lining. So just match your inner sleeve seam together and pin it there. And go around your sleeve, making sure to match up your notches all around the top and all around the side, as you can see here. Essentially what we're going to be doing is doing a stay stitch, so a large stitch length all around the edge of your sleeve to make sure it's nice and secure. Now we'll be creating a gathering stitch. So just from notch to notch, make sure you're still on your large stitch length, and you can actually just pull on the top thread just to pre-gather it a little bit. So just go ahead and do 2 lines of stitching from one notch to the other. And then you can just hand gather it just to make sure it's a little bit more even and maybe tighter on the ends. And there you have it. This is what your sleeve is going to look like once it's all complete. Now we'll get started on the bodice. So you've got your front here, and just lay your back piece on top and match at the shoulder seams. Then you can go ahead and also match up your side seams and just sew up your other side seam and your other shoulder seam as well. You can also overlock these pieces and press them towards the back. So what we're going to be doing here is just pressing all of these overlocked seams towards your back. So now grabbing your sleeve piece, just match up the side seam of your bodice and the inner sleeve seam of your sleeve, and just pin all the way around the armhole, making sure to evenly gather the top sleeve gathering either side of your shoulder seam. So you can just measure it across here, make sure it's all getting captured in there, and pin through your gathering as well. and just start sewing where your side seam is all around your armhole. And just go ahead and overlock this seam as well. Now to create your waist seam, essentially what you need to do is choose an elastic that's right for you. I've made this pattern for a 1.2 width elastic, 1.2 centimeters. And so what I'm going to do is create a 1.5 centimeter double rolled channel all along the waist kind of hem of the top. So I've just measured 1.5 and then doubled it by rolling it and pinned it. And then what I'm going to be doing is essentially just sewing this and creating that channel all around the bottom of the hem, leaving a gap to make sure that we can insert the elastic. So just in terms of the length of the elastic, just measure it around your waist where you feel comfortable. And this is going to be different for everyone and every type of elastic as well. Now once you've finished sewing that channel, just grab your loop turner again, slide it through all the way around back to where the opening is. And the same process as we did with the sleeve hem, just take the hook out the end and latch your elastic onto the hook. And now because this elastic is a bit wider, it takes a bit more finesse and fiddling to kind of get it through the channel without it twisting. So just take your time in this process. And I would just suggest getting a pin at the other end, pinning it, and then just taking your time, stretching your fabric all along your elastic to make sure it's kind of evenly dispersed. Once you've done that, you can match your ends, just crossing them over 1 centimeter either side. And I would suggest crossing them over this way, overlapping them and stitching, because that way it's going to sit into that channel a lot better than if you kind of had the two raw ends together and there was too much bulk and folding in it. So just back tack across that 3 or 4 times to make sure it's extra secure. And now you've done that, you can start back where you finished sewing the opening, just back tacking there and taking your time just to double roll your hem again, the same measurement. And just make sure not to capture your elastic within that stitching line, otherwise it won't move through the channel properly. Then you can do a final stretch of your fabric just to evenly disperse it around the elastic. And there's your Hera top finished. Here is the process to make your own bias binding for your keyhole and your neckline. You can also just buy your own, but in this case, around the neck hole and the keyhole, it's a bias grain and the 2 neckties are on the straight grain. So we can start by attaching the neckties to the bias grain panel for your neckline. Once you've attached 1 straight grain necktie, just start where you've done your seam and pull your bias grain neck panel around your neckline just to double check the measurements. You've also added in a stay stitch at this point just around your neckline and keyhole to stop it from stretching, but as you can see here I've got a little bit of excess, so I'm just going to cut that off, making sure you've got the 1 centimeter for the seam allowance. And now you can attach your other straight grain necktie to your bias neckline piece. To make your keyhole bias binding, all you need to do is get your keyhole piece, which has been cut on the bias, and fold in the 2 edges to meet in the middle. Once you've done that, then you can fold them up together again. To make your neckline bias binding, start by pressing flat the seams that you've created to attach the neckties to the neck piece. Once you've done that, you can start folding in the raw edges to meet in the middle. then folding up again so your folded edges meet. First, we'll be attaching the bias binding around the keyhole. I like to just start by folding in the raw edge of the bodice piece into the middle of your bias binding like so, and pinning. You can stretch it a little bit, especially around the corners, as this will help any gaping or excess fabric. So just take your time pinning all around your keyhole and making sure to capture both the top and the bottom of the bias binding, as well as the raw edge of the bodice piece. Then you can sew 1 to 2 millimeters around the edge. Just make sure you're capturing everything in between. Now to attach your neck binding, you just want to find the seam that you've created and make sure that the straight grain necktie is right on the other side of the keyhole. So that's going to go and tie up with the other side, and that your bias grain is going to go around the neckline. So just pin that there. And then follow your neck piece all the way around, making sure not to twist. Find the other side and pin through both pieces. And then take your time just pinning the rest around the neckline to make sure it's all evenly dispersed. Then you can start sewing from the necktie end all around your neckline, making sure to capture everything, all the way down the other side, and ending with a back tack at your other necktie. Now, as you can see here, the bias binding is sitting up a little. Once you actually press this in, the fibers will tighten up and it'll all sit nice and flat. And now we're on to making the skirt. Grab your pocket bag pieces and attach them to where the notches are on your front and back yoke pieces for your skirt. What we're going to do is just sew straight on so the pocket bag is facing the yoke panel. And once you've sewn all the way down, fold your pocket bag out, making sure the seam allowance is facing towards the pocket bag, and just create an edge stitch, so about 1 to 2 millimeters away from that seam line. This is just going to help the pocket bag sit nice and flat. Now you can go ahead and do that for all your pockets. Layer your pieces on top of each other, making sure to match the pocket bags exactly. Then starting with the back tack, just go straight down to where your pocket bag starts, 1 centimeter in from there, making sure to secure the bottom. Move it down a little and stop when you're about 1 centimeter in to the corner, and then pivot and sew around your pocket bag. Sometimes you need to lift the foot of your sewing machine just in case it's hard getting around the corners. Once you've finished attaching your yoke panels and pocket bags, bring it onto the ironing board and start by facing your pocket bag towards the front. And then you can just iron over that just to make sure you've got a really crisp opening. Now we'll be creating the waist elastic channel on your yoke piece. So just do the same process as we did for the bottom of the Hera top and create that double rolled channel, making sure to leave an opening at the end so you can get your elastic in. Grab your loop turner, thread it all the way through your channel. And just latch your chosen elastic right onto the hook. And take your time pulling this through because you don't want it to twist inside the actual channel. Also, for your measurement for your waist, just make sure to make your waist elastic a little bit tighter because it's going to be holding more fabric up on your body for the skirt. You just want it to be a little bit more snug so you've got that security. And before you close this opening, you can actually try it on and just see how it feels. So once you've pulled your elastic through either side, just start by overlapping your elastics about 1 centimeter on each side and creating a back tack a couple of times just to make sure it's extra secure. And then you can start sewing where you finished the opening before, and just make sure as you're doing this double rolled channel that you're not capturing the elastic within your stitching line, just so then your elastic can move freely. Once you've done that process, you just want to stretch it out again like we did with the top to make sure your elastic is evenly dispersed. You can do a little back tack on either side seam to make sure it doesn't twist. Now you can grab both of your main skirt panels. It's just basically the big rectangles that we're going to be gathering onto the yoke, and sew up your side seams. And once you've finished sewing both your side seams, just go ahead and overlock these as well. Once you've done that, you can create your pre-gathered stitches all along the top edge. So I would just suggest, because it is a lot of fabric, just to be doing it by pulling on the tension of the top of your sewing machine. That way you're actually kind of doing half the work already. I'd also suggest doing your front and back panels separately, so making sure you have the tail ends of the thread at the side seams, just so you're not having to gather one big piece and worrying whether it's even or not. And now it's time to attach your yoke to this panel. So what you want to do is attach it first at both side seams, matching up there, and then just taking the time to evenly disperse all of your gathering along that seam. And then you can sew this on. As I'm sewing gathering onto a panel, I like to just evenly gather it as well when I'm going along. I usually pin it as more of an estimate, and then when I'm actually at the sewing machine, I take my time just to disperse it evenly. And now you can double roll your hem and sew it up. And there's your Hera set. I hope you love it, and make sure to tag me on Instagram.